Imagine this. You're a black man. You pick up the phone, call the Ku Klux Klan, and say, in your real voice, "Hey, can I join?" Not only do they say yes, they welcome you with open arms. They send you a membership card, signed by the Grand Wizard himself. That's literally what happened in 1978 when Ron Stallworth, the first black detective in Colorado Springs, infiltrated the KKK without them having a clue. He didn't just join. He became one of their most trusted members. He spoke directly with David Duke. He got invited to cross burnings, all while being completely, unapologetically black. Yeah, the black guy joined the Klan. This story is real, and it's one of the most hilarious, jaw-dropping takedowns of racism you've never heard in full detail. Let's get into it. Ron Stallworth wasn't your average cop. He was the first black detective in Colorado Springs, which, in the late 70s, was about as rare as seeing a snowstorm in July. Actually, scratch that. Snowstorms in July are more likely. Ron was a unicorn in a sea of white faces, white attitudes, and white resentment. He joined the force to make a difference, but he was constantly surrounded by racism, not just from the public, but from some of his own co-workers who didn't want him there. Other officers questioned his competence. They watched him closer. They waited for him to fail. He had to be smarter, bolder, and frankly, more ridiculous than anyone else just to survive in that building, let alone thrive. He knew he had to prove himself. Stallworth said, "I wanted to prove that I could do this job as well as anyone, no matter the color of my skin." That desire to win, that refusal to be defined by other people's limitations, is what fueled the whole operation. This wasn't just about catching bad guys. This was about proving that a black man could outsmart the most racist organization in America on their own turf, using their own weapons, arrogance, and stupidity. And the timing was critical. The KKK was seeing a resurgence in the late 70s. They were recruiting, organizing, and trying to normalize hate in places like Colorado. David Duke had rebranded the Klan, putting them in suits instead of robes, talking about white rights instead of openly calling for violence. They were trying to mainstream their hatred. They needed to be stopped, and Ron was about to use their own stupidity against them. One day, Ron's in the office, flipping through the local paper, probably looking for nothing more exciting than the sports scores, and he sees a classified ad tucked between used furniture and job listings. Ku Klux Klan seeks new members. Interested parties contact. It even listed a P.O. box for contact, like they were advertising for a book club. Now, most of us would roll our eyes. Maybe write an angry letter, tear out the ad, and throw it away. But Ron, he picked up the phone. He didn't even intend to start a months-long investigation. He was just testing the water. He wanted to see if these idiots were as stupid as he thought they were. Spoiler alert, they were even dumber. He called the number, and a man named Ken, the local chapter organizer, answered. Ron, putting on his best angry white man voice, which he later admitted sounded like a bad Saturday Night Live impression, started ranting about minorities, about those people ruining the neighborhood, about his burning desire to join the cause and protect white America. Ken was thrilled. Ron sounded like the real deal, angry, motivated, white. He invited Ron to a meeting. Just like that. No background check, no verification. Stallworth had accidentally secured himself an invitation into the most racist organization in America based on nothing but a phone voice and shared hatred. He hung up the phone, smiled to himself, and then realized, oh, wait, he had used his real name, Ron Stallworth, his actual government-documented black man name. Most people would panic. Ron? He laughed, because he realized something crucial. These people were so convinced of their own superiority, so blinded by their racism, they would never believe a black man could be smart enough to fool them. Their prejudice was his invisibility cloak. So, here's the plan, and it's beautiful in its simplicity. Ron needed a body, a white face to go to the in-person meetings. He recruited a white narcotics officer, let's call him Chuck, though the movie calls him Flip Zimmerman, to be his eyes and ears on the ground. Chuck would show up, shake hands, nod along to the racist rants, all while Ron controlled everything from behind the scenes. Ron handled all the phone calls, all the planning, all the deep-level strategy conversations. He was the voice and the brains. Chuck was the body double, the physical presence showing up at the cross burnings and the secret meetings. They had to coordinate every detail, what Chuck would wear, what he would say, how he would react. Ron coached Chuck on white supremacist talking points, on Klan history, on how to sound convincingly hateful, Think about that for a second. A black man teaching a white man how to be more convincingly racist. This system was so effective that Ron started corresponding with the Grand Wizard himself, David Duke. Duke, a man who built his entire career on racial paranoia, who would go on to run for governor and nearly win, was communicating directly with a black man on a weekly basis, completely unaware. They talked strategy, they talked about recruitment, they talked about the black problem, and Duke never suspected a thing. Stallworth later explained the risk of using his real name. I didn't think they'd ever believe a black man could infiltrate them. Turns out, I was right. Their racism was their blind spot. They couldn't conceive of a black man being smart enough, strategic enough, disciplined enough to play them at their own game. White supremacy assumes white superiority. Ron used that assumption as a weapon. If you were Ron, what would be the first question you'd ask David Duke? Something serious? Something hilarious? Drop it in the comments and let's see who has the best one. For months, Ron was the KKK. Not physically, but vocally, strategically, psychologically. He talked to members about their plans, their ideology, their deepest fears and fantasies. He became phone buddies with the local organizer, Ken, who would call him up and rant for hours about the N-word problem, about Jewish conspiracies, about how white people were the real victims. And Ron would listen, take notes, and occasionally stifle a laugh. The absurdity peaked in his conversations with David Duke. Ron would call Duke up from his police department office, surrounded by black colleagues, and Duke would give him lessons on racial purity and anti-black rhetoric. At one point, Duke told this black man directly, "You can always tell a black man by the way he talks. They have a certain sound, a certain cadence. You can just tell." Ron, speaking in his natural voice, agreed enthusiastically. Meanwhile, Ron is literally talking to him, as a black man, in his actual voice. And Duke is too blinded by his own prejudice to hear the truth. He was listening for a stereotype, for the caricature he expected, and Ron was delivering a performance that confirmed Duke's every expectation while secretly recording every word. Duke was hearing what he wanted to hear, not what was actually there. This trust was so deep, so complete, that Ron made a bold move. He asked David Duke for his official Klan membership card, and Duke personally signed it, put his name right there on the dotted line, mailed it to Ron Stallworth's P.O. box. The Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan officially welcomed the black detective into the organization. Ron still has that card today. It sits in his home, a physical piece of proof that racism is, at its core, unbelievably stupid. The FBI and local police were initially skeptical. A black guy joining the Klan? It sounded like a prank. But as the evidence piled up, the signed membership card, the detailed plans Ron was collecting, the names of Klan members in the police force and military, they had to support the operation. Ron was exposing Klan infiltration of law enforcement and the military. He was uncovering active duty soldiers who were plotting violence. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was national security. The investigation climaxed when David Duke announced he was visiting Colorado Springs for a Klan recruitment event. Ron's team had been gathering intelligence for months, documenting everything, building their case. But now, the final showdown was set. The Grand Wizard was coming to town, and Ron Stallworth was about to have the greatest day of his professional life. The ultimate flex. Ron was assigned to Duke's security detail. Read that again. Ron Stallworth, the black detective who had been talking to Duke for months on the phone, was now responsible for protecting David Duke's physical safety during his Colorado Springs visit. This is where the story transcends infiltration and becomes legend. This is where comedy meets poetic justice. They meet face to face. They shake hands. Duke smiles that politician smile, that Grand Wizard smile, completely at ease. He's shaking the hand of the man whose voice he'd been trusting for months, whose advice he'd been taking, whose membership card he'd personally signed. Ron smiles back, professional, courteous, and the whole time, inside, he's screaming with laughter. Duke has absolutely no clue, zero recognition, none. That photo still exists, and it's one of the greatest trolling moments in American history. Ron said years later, "It took every ounce of control not to laugh in his face. I wanted to tell him so badly. I wanted to say, 'Hey David, remember that guy you've been talking to? That's me, the black guy.' He was the ultimate insider, the perfect double agent, and the Grand Wizard was his puppet, dancing on strings Ron controlled. The win. Ron and his team prevented multiple cross-burnings, stopped planned acts of violence, and gathered enough intelligence to expose several local Klan members hiding in plain sight. They found Klan members serving in the military who had access to weapons and explosives. They found them in the police department, wearing badges while secretly wearing hoods. Ron's investigation completely neutralized the Colorado Springs chapter and sent shockwaves through Klan operations nationwide. Hit the like button if you think Ron Stallworth deserves a national holiday for this level of genius. Seriously, this man is a hero, and we should be teaching this in schools. The investigation ended successfully. The Klan activity in Colorado Springs dropped sharply. Ron's work crippled the organization's ability to operate openly in the region. Members went underground or left the organization entirely. The chapter never recovered. One black man with a telephone destroyed what decades of civil rights marches couldn't fully dismantle: the local Klan's sense of security and superiority. But the story didn't come out right away. Stallworth kept his identity and the details of the operation secret for decades. He didn't want to compromise future investigations or put his family at risk. Think about that. He pulled off one of the most audacious undercover operations in law enforcement history, and he couldn't tell anyone. Not his friends, not his extended family. He carried this secret for over 30 years, watching the world continue spinning, watching racism persist, knowing what he'd done, but unable to brag about it. It wasn't until 2014 that he finally wrote his book, Black Klansman: Race, Hate, and the Undercover Investigation of a Lifetime. The world finally got the full, unvarnished story. The phone calls, the meetings, the membership card, the photo with Duke. Everything. And people couldn't believe it. It sounded too crazy to be true. But every word was documented, verified, real. Then, in 2018, Spike Lee turned it into an Oscar-winning film, and suddenly, Ron Stallworth became a household name. The world finally saw what he pulled off, not just as a cop doing his job, but as a black man who punked the most racist group in America, using nothing but intelligence, courage, and an absolutely savage sense of humor. The film won an Academy Award. Ron walked the red carpet, and David Duke had to watch the whole thing, knowing he'd been played. Ron Stallworth didn't just infiltrate the Klan. He exposed how fragile, how fundamentally stupid hate really is. Racism relies on the belief that the target is less intelligent, less capable, less deserving. It needs that belief to function. Ron shattered it. He proved that white supremacists aren't superior. They're gullible. They're easy to fool because they're so convinced they can't be fooled. This is the smartest kind of revenge. It wasn't about meeting violence with violence, hatred with hatred. It was about destroying hate with intelligence, discipline, and a sense of humor so sharp it could cut through decades of propaganda. He used their own prejudice as the ultimate security flaw, the back door into their entire operation. And once he was inside, he dismantled them piece by piece. This story is a blueprint for resistance. It shows that the most dangerous weapon against white supremacy might not be a protest sign or a raised fist, though those matter too. Sometimes it's a telephone, a quick wit, and a refusal to let them define who you are or what you're capable of. Ron Stallworth looked at the KKK and said, "Watch me join your organization and destroy it from the inside." And he did exactly that. What other figures in Black history used humor or intelligence as their main weapon against oppression? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear who inspires you. Let's talk about the deep cuts, the details that make this story even more incredible. Ron's partner, Chuck, the white officer who served as his body double, had to actually go to a cross-burning ceremony. He was terrified, surrounded by real Klan members in their robes, watching a cross go up in flames, listening to hate speech. But Ron, the voice on the phone, the master strategist, was coaching him through the entire ceremony via a hidden wire, telling him when to nod, when to cheer, when to look appropriately angry. Ron had to maintain the persona that he hated Black people, hated himself, essentially. Even while talking to his black colleagues at the police station, he was living two completely separate, contradictory lives simultaneously. Ron Stallworth, the detective, respected by his peers, and Ron Stallworth, the Klan member, trusted by racists. The mental strength required to maintain that split identity, to never slip up, never break character, is just as incredible as the investigation itself. The long-term impact of what Ron did can't be overstated. His work proved that law enforcement could and should infiltrate hate groups. It showed that these organizations, for all their bluster and threats, are often more disorganized and reliant on empty rhetoric than they are on actual power. They're held together by fear and ignorance. And once you expose those foundations, the whole structure collapses. Ron provided a roadmap that's been used by law enforcement agencies ever since. He retired as an investigator after 32 years of service, having proven his point 1,000 times over. He didn't just join the KKK, he punked them, exposed them, and helped dismantle their operations. And he did it while being the first black detective in a city that didn't want him there. He faced racism from the people he was sworn to protect, and racism from the people he was investigating. And he beat both. Ron Stallworth didn't just win, he won with style. He won with humor. He won by being smarter, funnier, and more strategic than every single person who underestimated him. And he showed the world that the black man who exposes hatred, who infiltrates it and destroys it from within, is always smarter than the man hiding behind a hood. Always. Every time. No exceptions. Share this story with someone who needs a laugh and a lesson today. Subscribe to Black America for more truth about the culture and the come-up. Because if Ron Stallworth taught us anything, it's that intelligence, courage, and a good sense of humor can defeat hate every single time.